Okay, we're going to call this special meeting of the City of Trenton's Planning Board to order. 6:06. Adequate notice was provided for this open meeting in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act. The notice was mailed to the papers of record, the Times of Trenton and the Trentonian. It was posted on the city's website. It was distributed by email, and it was posted on a bulletin board in City Hall. Can we have a roll call, please?
Dan Fatton.
Present.
Jamie Carpenter.
Present.
John McBride. Jeff Halpern.
You're muted, Jeff. Still muted.
Oh, Oh,
Yes.
yes, there you go. Marcus Green. Patricia Nima Mohammed. Okay. Charles Romanow.
Present.
Randy Baum. Joe Harrison.
Present.
Juan Cassaget. Anthony Santora.
Present.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I believe we can call the first item.
Item number 1.
Oh, sorry. Wait, Cherry. Michael wanted to make announcements. I forgot.
Sorry.
Michael, you're up.
Yep. Sharing my screen. There we go. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. We just have 2 announcements for tonight. The first is that the draft Capital City Renaissance Plan has been released for public comment. This is a partnership between the City of Trenton and the State of New Jersey for the planning of the downtown of the city. This is going to be the driver of the future development in our downtown, so it is very important that we get public feedback on this plan. Thankfully, we have a good public comment period that includes, it's going to include several Capital City Redevelopment Corporation public hearings, which are still to be scheduled. But there will also be an August 26th Planning Board hearing, and then public comments are not due until September 3rd. So please go to the NJEDA website, that's New Jersey Economic Development Authority website, to view the Capital City Renaissance Plan. And there is a feedback form right on the website there at the link that you can fill out to provide your feedback on it. The second thing that we wanted to mention is that the work is underway for the Mercer County Hazard Mitigation Plan. And the City of Trenton does have a chapter within the mitigation plan. This is our mitigation plan as well. So we do need public feedback on this. We've announced this several times. Unfortunately, at this point, we have not yet received any public feedback from Trenton residents. So we're asking Trenton residents to please go to surveymonkey.com/r/Mercer stakeholder. So that address on the screen. I'm going to leave that up on the screen for a few seconds. And if anybody has any questions about any of these, I can take them for a minute, if that's okay with Dan.
Yeah, and Michael, can you also supply those links in the chat?
Yes, I can.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
I started that survey and I found it quite confusing, and it's not written as if it wants feedback from residents. It's written as though they want feedback from facilities. Just FYI.
Yeah, this came from the county, so we're just doing what the county is asking of us.
I'm just mentioning it because you said that there's no survey responses, and I honestly think that if people went to that, it would not be necessarily intuitive.
I understand.
I see Patricia Nima Mohammed has joined. Thank you, Pat. Thanks, Jeffrey, for putting those links in the chat. And then let's call our first item, please.
Item number 1, public discussion on proposed cannabis ordinance. The City of Trenton is proposing an ordinance for the City Council to regulate the use of cannabis in the City of Trenton. The planning board will review the proposed ordinance for consistency with the Trenton 250 master plan. The public will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments on the ordinance on this evening of Monday, June 28th at 6:11 p.m.
Thank you, Cherry. And I believe Law Director Bridges is going to present. Is that correct?
I'm happy to introduce it. Thank you, Mr. Fatton, for that.
Please.
Thank you, Body, and thank you, Councilman Harrison, for allowing me to be here today. So the proposed ordinance, draft ordinance that's been submitted is an attempt to take a holistic approach at the city's opting into the Compassion Care Act, as well as the recreational vote that was passed by the voters this past election. It really deals with two issues. There's really three parts that are of importance that should be open for discussion. Number one is the actual application process and the vetting process that the city suggests undertaking with respect to the various candidates at all the classes of cannabis licensing that will be issued by the state. And the second will be a revision to the city's tax ordinance and tax code with respect to how these operations are going to be taxed, how they're going to be charged, and really incorporating that to the fullest extent for the city of Trenton to really be able to take advantage of not only the financial aspects of benefits of this, but also the potential upside with redevelopment that's really spawns throughout the entire city. And then a committee, the committee that will be put in place to vet and look at these operations and score these operations appropriately, and then regulations for how they're going to operate, where they're going to be, what are they going to look like, really a more tangible look at these operations. I will say I did receive some comments from the planning board's attorney probably at 5:30 today, which, having looked at them, I believe raised very salient points, and maybe Mr. McGill can jump in on that when he deems appropriate to kind of go over those issues that I think need to be incorporated. But right now, again, this was really a complete overhaul of the ordinance that was on the books in an effort to really put Trenton's best foot forward in supporting this, to let the state and the companies know they're looking at Trenton, that we're looking at this very seriously, very exhaustively, and again, very holistically, so that there's really good parameters with respect to application, funding, and operations of these. So with that, I present this ordinance for this meeting for comment, as well as comment from the board and comment from the board's attorney. And again, my locker room speech would be, let's be over inclusive with respect to our comments. There's not a bad comment, there's not a bad question. This is important for the city, it's important for the residents, and so anything that is brought up, we need to look at. We need to do a deep dive into that. With the benefit of this body's expertise, Mr. Gill's understanding of it, myself, and I think this is really an opportunity for Trenton to put its best foot forward in this regard.
Thank you, Director. So in terms of process, what I'd like to recommend is that, yes, we want folks to comment on any portion of this. I would recommend that we start with Mr. McGill, the Planning Board's attorney's feedback. Then we allow board members to ask some questions, make comments, and particularly in light of the hearing that we had a few weeks ago, the public comment meeting. And then we'll open it up for anyone else that would like to speak or ask a question. So if that's okay, George, I'd like to turn it over to you for your legal feedback on the draft ordinance.
Sure. And I'll try to just keep it, can you hear me, by the way? No? You can, thanks.
I can, yes.
Yeah, the first thing that I wanted to bring up is that the statute required that the city and all municipalities act by August 21, or everything's going to, all the licenses would be permitted in all zones. So I know this is a stab at doing that, but this ordinance itself doesn't actually amend section 315, which is our development ordinance. So I think it has to be more clear in that regard and actually reference the land use ordinances and amend the permitted uses within the land use ordinance. I know that there's a reference to the land use ordinance. It says that this ordinance would take precedent over the land use ordinance. But if it's not in the land use ordinance, at the very best, or very least, you'd be subject to a questioning of that. And the point of this is to control it, not to open the floodgates. So I think we need to look at that. That was the first thing that jumped out at me. And because this is a taxing ordinance, it struck me that the taxing aspects of this ordinance, the money that's to be raised is not earmarked for any of the purposes that were discussed when we opened this matter up to the public. So I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention. That might be something that we want to take a look at. There were very specific comments as to how this money could be used and should be used. And I think that's also part and parcel of the statute as well. There are certain things in the ordinance that I know can be cleaned up. I know this was put together for tonight, and but the numbers of the statute sounds like a small thing, but you know, when you're amending a statute, you need to specifically amend certain sections, and some of these sections either don't exist or refer to existing ordinances that don't really jive with what this document is referencing. So I know that's something that can be coordinated, and it's not substantive. It's not substantive as long as it's corrected. It'd be very substantive if it's left the way it is. So I have gone through the ordinance. There are 3 separate penalty phases, or clauses rather. That's kind of confusing. That needs to be taken a look at. And Mr. Chairman, I've gone through the ordinance. I don't want to bore everybody. I can throw it back, but I have other comments that I'll make as we go. Do you want me to continue?
Sorry, the mute button sometimes hard to get to. No, I think that's good and sufficient, okay. George. So now we'll take comments and questions from the board, and then we're going to open it up for public comment. So I wanted to throw a few things out. One is, I'd like to see in the whereas section something added about the Trenton master plan, because I actually think that this concept of attracting new businesses and providing, and particularly in terms of the micro licensing and allowing for folks to enter the industry, is in line with the master plan. And since we're the planning board, that would be one recommendation, is just to actually have a reference to the master plan. The second item is that I think we might want to say in the whereas section something about the 2 public hearings that we've had now. So we had the meeting, and I forget the actual date, but I'm sure George or someone from the staff can correct me, about 6 weeks ago. And we had really, thank you, Jeff. So we had really strong participation. There was more than 50 people. We had lots of public comment, and they were all, I would say, it was one negative comment and everybody else was supportive. And I just think we should mention that we've had a public input period. And then the third comment is in line with what George said about the taxation. Now, it's not really the planning board's purview, right? Like, ours is to determine whether this is compliant with the master plan and to talk about where things should be. But what we heard really strongly during that first meeting was that people wanted the dollars to actually flow to those who had been most harmed by the drug war. And so I think if there is a taxation element, one of the recommendations to either the law department or as this gets passed on to council is that those who are in charge of the taxation think about where the dollars are actually going to go, and that it's not just general operating funds for the city, that it needs to be earmarked to actually benefit those who've been harmed by decades of failed drug policy. And that's really reflective of what we heard a few weeks ago. Do other board members have comments or questions?
I have some comments and on some specific pieces of it. I also have some grammatical typo comments, but I guess like I just email afterward about it. I don't know if we need to get into that detail here. But just looking at my notes. On page 9 under the buffering requirements, I was just curious as to how those numbers were chosen. No cannabis dispensary should be located within 1,000 feet of a dispensary, and then shall not be located within, it says 100 feet. I'm not sure that's a typo. That should be 1,000. 100 feet or directly adjacent to or directly across the street from a school.
I can answer that. The comments, I'll start with the school first, Mr. Romanow. That really addresses what I know was council's articulated concern with respect to certain dispensaries being next to schools. I mean, we really have to toe a very fine balance. We don't want to make it such that it stifles redevelopment and limits our opportunity throughout the city. And as suggested, and I think as discussed at length, if we're looking at the map that was provided to me of the location regarding now, it really limits any operations besides certain clandestine parts of the city. This was an effort to looking at how long is it going to how are the operations going to function, where they're going to be located, and just realizing that there's a school, there's a church, there's something that would prohibit operations on almost every block of the city of Trenton. So to make it a little bit more peaceful and less of a harsh proposal for council, my thought was to make it clear that we're not going to have dispensaries operating directly across the street from a high school, but that doesn't mean that it can't be one block over and down one, and to kind of belt and suspend it, we put 100 feet buffer in that to really address that issue. And it's an issue that we're going to have to address because it's really don't limit the opportunities. With respect to the 1,000 feet, there was some discussion that I had, and I know there's a caller or participant on here who gave some, quite frankly, some expert feedback with respect to the proximity of operations. And if you're looking at a 1,000 foot, if you're looking at 1,000 feet between operations, that's really probably 3 to 4 city blocks. So it makes it so that you're not basically congesting one area with too many with too many operations, such that it becomes again something that would be concerned of council. But once again, the purpose of this is to have a little bit of feedback and dialogue on that. So I think we would all welcome your thoughts and anyone else's thoughts with respect to those numbers.
Can you clarify if that is consistent for the rules for liquor stores or bars?
It is not consistent with the rules for liquor stores and bars. I don't have the specific specifics in front of me, but if you're looking at a 1,500 foot distance, that's basically a quarter of a mile between operations. With respect to liquor stores, I don't know that ordinance off the top of my head. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just jump in and just, Mr. Bridges, the ordinance itself says 1,000 feet at page 9 and 1,500 feet at 19. So then
that should be consistent. That should be consistent.
Okay.
It should be 1,000.
Okay.
That's incorrect.
Okay. Thanks.
Charlie, sorry, you want to continue?
No, it's great. Yeah, thank you. And Dana, I think the point you brought up about how it compares to liquor stores, that's several of my comments were about that, of making sure that it kind of is, we're treating it as, any other land use, more or less.
Look, you're preaching to choir when it comes to that with me, but again, what we're also dealing with certain folks who are still skittish about this, who still don't fully understand it, who are still somewhat, we need to still educate them on this. So that was really my and our suggested approach as a little bit of a buffer and a little bit of a easing in terms of educating the public as to how these operations are going to go, how they're going to operate, how the signage is going to be, because there are going to be certain folks that, notwithstanding how much education we give to them, notwithstanding how much the community cries out their support for this, we're always going to have folks that are still just very concerned about these operations coming to town.
All right, thank you. Another comment for on page 10 about the City Cannabis Advisory Committee. Says that they'll be appointed by the city governing body. Is that the city council, the planning board? What exactly is the city governing body in this instance?
It would be essentially members from the city council. It would be members from the mayor or his administration or their designee. I think it's important to have folks from the local law enforcement, Trenton Police there, and it's basically a committee of folks that will meet with these entities, vet these entities, look at the applications and look at the operations going forward. So I believe it's listed in there who those folks are.
There's a few. I wasn't sure if there's going to be more or if that was it. I think there's 7 or 8 of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that is very apropos for public comment and something that by no means was that a finalized list. I think it's a good start, and I think it's kind of the necessary, indispensable folks that need to be there. But again, to the extent that there's some thoughts as to adding, subtracting, proliferating that committee, I think we should obviously could take those comments into serious consideration.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Page 14 about signage. It says external signage, including window signage, must be limited to text identifying business and the logo for the business, provided that the said logo does not include a cannabis plant leaf and or outward glorification of cannabis consumption. My initial reaction was just, that seems very strict. I don't know if there's other, like liquor stores, if there's a similar rule that you can't have it at the window. It just seems, and there was a similar one later on about, it's not showing cannabis like near the window. It has to be, if you're walking on public right away, you're not supposed to be able to see it. It just seems like those things would stigmatize these locations, whereas we're kind of, I think, trying to do the opposite. Although I understand there needs to be some regulation for that.
Yeah, most of that comes directly from the statute in terms of signage and with respect to how they can advertise. So that was an effort to stay consistent with the state regulating entity as well as the state laws that are going to be put into place and will continue to be put into place with respect to signage. That isn't something that we came up with. Okay.
And then my last question, just on page 15 about security and surveillance. Cannabis establishments shall be monitored at all times by closed circuit television, 24 hours per day. And then the next paragraph, operators must provide the Trenton City Police Department with access to this real-time camera footage in case of an emergency. So 2 parts to that question, I guess. That second part about must provide access, that's only in the case of emergency, correct? It's not at all times that they would have access to that.
Correct. That's
Okay.
Yes, they have to have access in case of an emergency. If there's a fire, if there's a theft, if there's a problem there. Does that mean that access, they can just go in and access the premises as they deem appropriate? That's not what's being said there. It's for safety purposes, and again, this is all pursuant to the statutes, to laws that are already on the books.
And so, the same with the 24-hour day camera closed circuit, is that part of the state statute?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Bridges, I did note that on page 20, there's also a signage clause that seems to limit signage even more strictly. Roman numeral 6, if you want to take a look at that. We don't have to go over it, but it just says in reference to cannabis cultivation centers, starting on page 19:4, and then it goes Roman numeral 6. It says no signage other than directional or discrete building identification. It just seems to be more strict and maybe contrary to the other signage clause. So you might want to take a look at that just to make them consistent.
I'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Sure.
I would just piggyback and echo that I think that it's really restrictive to not allow the leaf, and it's like the universal sign, and I don't really, unless that's in the state law, I don't know why you would want to do that, because don't we want to allow people to understand where they're actually going into, and just, I mean, sure, it should not be visible from the street. That part seems it's in line with the law.
That part is very clear state law, Mr. Fatton. That's very clear.
The leaf on the sign.
Yeah.
Well, maybe the makers can revisit that because it doesn't make much sense, and especially is not true in other states that have legalized. Other board members wish to ask questions or make a comment?
Yes, this is Wanda. Wanda Sliggett. Just had a question for clarification. Someone mentioned that the laws in comparison to the alcohol laws are not consistent. So would you say that these are more restrictive or less restrictive than the alcohol laws?
More.
Okay, thank you. And another question, the 1,000 feet from the school, is that consistent with what's considered a school zone?
It was for the school part. It is actually 100 feet and not directly adjacent. So it's not 1,000 feet for schools. It's 100 feet and not directly adjacent to it, or directly across the street from it, adjacent to it.
Okay.
And that just, I'm sorry, and just for your benefit, and that is not a regulation per se. It's something that we propose, knowing some of the concerns that have been articulated with respect to having these operations directly across the street from schools. It's been articulated several times, and I think it would hurt our getting support for this at the end game. So that was why that buffer was put in place.
Okay, so the question specifically about what defines a school zone, is that the same as what would define a school zone, or not necessarily? Is it smaller or larger?
It would be a school zone, a place where children are in school getting education. It would not be, for example, a board of education building. It would be a school, the junior school,
right.
The high schools, the elementary
okay,
schools, charter schools.
I guess, to give a better example, I live next door to a school, and I was told by law enforcement that even the community where I live is considered a school zone because of its proximity to the school. And so that's my question. Is there a clear definition of a school zone other than the school itself?
Wes, I think she's talking about the 1,000 feet drug-free school zone areas.
Yeah, that's what most towns are using, the 1,000 feet drug-free school zone area. Again, I think that's giving the layout of the city. I think that's very restrictive. If we were to say,
okay, I'm not judging the description. I'm just asking for clarification.
Yeah, no, I didn't think you were. It is. Most towns are using the 1,000 feet drug-free school zone buffer. This was our attempt to kind of split the difference to keep business open, to keep the opportunities robust throughout the city. So that was why we went with the none directly adjacent nor within 100 feet of a school zone. But it is not. This is no longer a 1,000 feet drug-free school zone issue.
Okay, thank you.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
Other board members that wish to ask a question or speak, and those who are not board members, if you wish to speak, if you could start raising your hands, we'll create a queue and call on folks after we get finished going through the board list. Other board members? Last call for board members that wish to speak or make a comment at this point, and then we'll come back at the end after we do public comment. Okay, let's open it up for comments from the attendees who are not board members. I'm going to start. I see C. McKiffin. Can unmute yourself and ask a question or make a comment.
Hi, Charlana McKiffin. I have questions about the committee that's put on place. Is there a list of who the individuals are that's on that committee, and the criteria they're using to make a decision as to who the city supports to have a cannabis business here in Trenton, New Jersey?
Would you like to answer that, Mr. Bridges?
I thought, and let me just pull up the most current iteration of it. I thought that the suggested committee members were in there. It was members of council, the mayor, his designee, the police department or their designee, someone from the law department or their designees, obviously someone from the redevelopment entity or their designee. And that was looking at the indispensable parties or who are going to make these determinations, look at the relevant factors, be it from a licensing standpoint, law enforcement standpoint, development standpoint, liquidity standpoint. There were some suggestions, but again, I think there may be an opportunity for a robust conversation to have, to see what other folks the public deems and this body deems would be appropriate to potentially participate on that committee.
I appreciate your suggestion. I think that that's very important that we know and have transparency as to who's going to be on this committee, because we do have some bad players in the cannabis industry, organizations that have scammed people who are from communities that was hit hardest by the war on drugs. And I think we need to know who we are allowing to come in our community. So I would appreciate it, and I think it's a great idea if we have that information out there and allow the community to make comments and suggestions on what they think. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And I think that this administration values that input, and I think any community, entity, city that is looking to begin these operations would be silly not to really take into account the public's input and the public's beliefs in this regard. So thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Mr. Bridges, building on that comment, which I think this section is actually quite strong, but I wonder if you want to actually allow for nominations from the community and specifically say that either the mayor or the council will take recommendations, and community members can actually they can nominate themselves or nominate someone else to serve on that committee. It's not really, it's more just that there's a minimum. It's not, they can go above and beyond that, and that there are certain folks who will be designated, but it doesn't necessarily say, and look, council members, members of the planning board, we are residents, but for those who are not affiliated with some entity, it might be worthwhile to explicitly say there's a process.
I could not agree with your comment more, and the comment of the woman who just spoke, and I think we need to revise that to include that input. I think that's a great idea, and that's really the purpose of these meetings, to get those good ideas from our community and from our body.
Thank you, Director.
Can I just make one more comment to that quickly?
Please.
That's a great idea, but the other factor is that our community doesn't know who the bad actors are in this cannabis industry. Like, we had an organization to charge people $500 for how to get a cannabis medical marijuana license in boot camp in 2019, and there hasn't been a licensing process since then. So in factoring in how you're going to select these people to a committee, if you could just take that into consideration.
Thank you for your comment. I see next on the list to speak is Leo Bridgewater. Mr. Bridgewater, you're up.
Oh boy. Can you guys hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
I can.
Okay, awesome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Leo Bridgewater. I am the National Director of Veterans Outreach with Minorities for Medical Marijuana, and a longtime advocate for the adult use program here in New Jersey, as well as the medical marijuana program. I've come before, I believe, this board, the city council, its predecessors, a long history of advocating for this and explaining to, trying to educate the city of Trenton on this coming legislation, which has been years in the making. I would implore the city or this council, the city council, when exploring a committee, I heard police presence, development presence, but I would implore you that you actually find someone who has a actual background in this industry, and to the previous caller's point, there are a lot of bad actors, and a lot of programs happening, but the education hasn't really taken hold too well here in the city, despite efforts, from a number of people, including myself. I would also beg you to think about the fact that there are thousands of Trentonians who now qualify to have their records expunged and don't know it. And so when looking at that education, you think about that, as well as not just where cannabis businesses are going to go, but also the education part of the cannabis and hemp industry. That is something that this city could actually rally around. I've suggested the idea that the Cannabis and Hemp College of New Jersey needs to be based out of Trenton, New Jersey. I actually should go at the it should be the old Mercer County Hospital. I think that is the way you create generational revenue for the city, and also bring in and attract more business here. Because when we're talking about, understand something, we've been saying cannabis industry, not program, not grant, but industry. And so this is a very particular funny time in history. And so we are practicing what is called mesoeconomics, which is the creation of the institutions that allow for macro and micro to take place. That's this now. And so we need to be aware that the decisions that we are making actually go maybe 4 or 5 generations beyond ourselves. And it is difficult to get people to think 4 or 5 steps beyond themselves when you live in an instant gratification type of society, such as the one that we live in. And so this unique time, we need to know what assets and resources we have available to us. And last but not least, I will say this: our biggest asset when it comes to the cannabis and hemp industry just so happens to be our mayor. He's a very historical figure as far as the cannabis industry is concerned. I know this because I sit on the board for the Cannabis World Congress Business Expo. So I have direct ties to the industry. And I could tell you that there is no other Trentonian other than in the industry, other than Ed Fortune and myself, than Reed Gassiar, who keeps coming at me from all different angles within the industry. And I feel like the city of Trenton could use this to help attract even more business and industry, because our mayor happens to be a historical figure within the cannabis industry as a whole and hemp industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bridgewater. Director Bridges, I think we really heard in the last public meeting in May about this idea of creating an educational institution and leveraging potentially the hospital or some other facility. And I know we put that in the letter to council and to the mayor that we sent after that hearing. I'm just curious if the law department did have any discussion or if there was any thought about including that in the ordinance.
There was thought and some serious thought about including that in the ordinance, to be very honest with you. The issue being the timing that we have right now and really logistically putting that together. Look, we have a great opportunity with the higher education institutions that are operating within the city of Trenton. We have Mercer County, we have Thomas Edison, Kane University just put a satellite university here, and Kane has really become known as one of the at the forefront of research. So that was absolutely something that has been discussed, something that we're going to look to piggyback off of this at some point in time. And given the timing, given the deadline that we have, we wanted to get at least a holistic approach with respect to the licensing, development piece, zoning piece, and operations of it, and then look to dovetail that aspect into it as well. But that's quite frankly equally as vital, if not more, than the ordinance itself, because that's really going to allow the community not only to get involved in it from an education standpoint, but it'll help educate our youth. Not every child that's graduating from our high schools in the Trenton High School, Ewing High School, the surrounding areas are necessarily going to go to a 4-year college, but they're going to have the opportunity to learn about cultivation. They're going to have the opportunity to learn about manufacturing, about testing, about labeling. So that's something that is the administration discussed in a great deal of length. And quite frankly, once we get to that point, it will be probably equally as large, if not large, as the document you have here to really bring that to fruition. So that is at the top of the administration's list. It's important for a number of reasons, and we're very very in tune to that aspect of this emerging market.
That's good to hear. Thank you for clarifying. Anything else you'd wish to respond to from Mr. Bridgewater's comments?
No, I mean, the one thing, Mr. Bridgewater, how are you, my friend? One of the things that, we've discussed internally is getting folks like Mr. Bridgewater, like Mr. Howard, involved from a community standpoint, and really, echo and be the mouthpiece for the community in terms of letting not just the administration know, but the governing body know, and the state know this is something that's a good thing, that we're all in this together. All oars are rowing in the same direction. So please, Mr. Bridgewater, Mr. Howard, the folks that are on here, don't think this as us not hearing your voice. We hear you loud and clear, and your name specifically are referenced, at least once a conversation when we have this with respect to who we need to bring to the fold and get involved and help us push this very important initiative. So value your comments, want more of your comments. We could talk offline. We need to incorporate these comments, and again, to echo the statements that were made earlier, I think we do need to revise the committee to have a little bit more community input on that for folks like yourselves. So, again, this is the opportunity to raise those issues so that we can really have a tight, all-encompassing, all-inclusive ordinance going forward that we're going to present to the governing body. So, again, I thank the public for their comments in that regard.
And this meeting has been fruitful thus far, and I just want you to know that it's important for everybody, including the planning board, to make sure you make the distinction between impact zone money and social equity fund. They're two very different things. And it's important that you do make that distinction, because the social equity fund is where you're going to get the funding that would address barriers to entry for people from the legacy market and so forth, or those who want to get into it. The impact zone money, that is something that goes to the city. And that is something that I believe the planning board is going to have much more of a more purview over in terms of where that goes and influence on how that money is used. But it is very important that you, in the very beginning, make sure you make that distinction, because historically, social equity programs are after the fact. Whereas unlike any other time in history, as far as cannabis goes, our social equity program will, number one, be run from the state level, which is different than what you would see in California or any place else, because those social equity programs are run by municipalities, and that's how they get screwed up. The second thing you must take into account is that there is a 30% carve out for social equity applicants. Now, the reason why that's important is because that 30% in the state of New Jersey is the floor, not the ceiling. Think of it in terms of with California, when they started issuing out licenses, God knows how many licenses were actually issued before. Social equity influence was in that. Whereas here, we only got 12. There are only 12 licenses. So from license number 13 to whatever the end game will be, there's going to be a social equity influence in the decision making from the state level, the city, the municipality level. We need to be on the same, we need to be somewhat in lockstep, but then also with the Trentonian flavor to it as well. And so these are things that we have to think about at the very, very beginning. And I just want you to make sure that you all make that distinction. And to your point earlier, sir, I'm loving this meeting. This is great. And I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you very much for your comments and for your insights. I think the next person on the list to speak is Jacques Howard.
Greetings, everyone, and thank you for your time. I appreciate all the comments, and I want to say that Leo Bridgewater stole a lot of my thunder. I am representing Black Cannabis and Trenton 365 Media with a hyper focus on civic engagement and sharing information about what's happening in the community with my networks. So a couple of the questions that I have 4, and they're kind of quick, but if anyone wants to jump in and answer them, I'm willing to take that. One, I'd like to know what is an example of a municipality that is doing it right? Taxation. Who's going to decide where the monies go? Why can't we treat it just like alcohol? And full disclosure from elected officials who have any involvement with any cannabis business. And I want to reference the previous meeting with public discussion when a current elected official in Trenton made a comment about, I do not know anything about cannabis, but I know about hemp. And that led me to question that particular council person's involvement in a business or a forthcoming business, and if there would be any concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Mr. Bridges, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I'm happy. Good afternoon, Mr. Howard. How are you?
Fine, Wes, thanks.
Good. So I would say yes. I mean, that would be something that would have to be disclosed for any member, quite frankly, that's going to be serving on this committee. We want to have a kind of a disclosure agreement to attest to and confirm that they do not have any economic pecuniary interest involvement with any of the entities that are applying and or operating. I think that would for basic common sense reasons that could not be permitted. I do remember the comment that you made. I don't know what precipitated that comment, but I do understand the concern in there, and I share in your concern in that regard. If I may, Mr. Fatt, just jump out of line a little bit. I think some of the questions that Mr. Howard raised just now with respect to what municipalities are doing it right, as well as to answer some of Mr. McGill's concerns that I understand his concerns with respect to the LDO. Someone that I rely on heavily, and quite frankly, very much so, who I think is really an expert in this field with respect to municipalities doing right is Mr. Chuck Latini. I believe he's on the call and he could answer a lot of these questions in very robust form. So if it's okay, we just jump out of line a little bit here and let Mr. Latini jump in here and answer these questions. I think that would be a good time to do that.
Hey there, Chuck.
Hey, everyone.
Would you like to speak?
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, I'm a planner, so we never have a hard time figuring out a way to say something during these types of meetings. Thank you all. As Wesley said, I'm Chuck Latini. I am, born and raised in Mercer County. Been in this cannabis game now for I guess like 4 years now, working on both the municipal and the private side. So I've seen good actors, bad actors. I've seen towns do it right and towns doing it wrong. It's hard to say who's doing it right, Jock. I think it's an evolving process. We're certainly trying right now to ensure Trenton gets it right. These comments tonight are absolutely spot on. What we tried to do, at least in the broad framework of laying this thing out, is ensure that there is that connect between multi-state operators and micro licensees, and there's opportunities for training and in the evaluation criteria, we want to see that people are thinking about Trenton first as they're approaching us. And I think that makes all the difference in the world. I think Leo's all comments also on ensuring that we tighten up that and making sure that the right folks are getting a shot and on the right out the gate as soon as you swing, I think is important. The other thing that was became difficult in figuring out the where was the city and the 250 master plan is really in the midst of doing a comprehensive overhaul. So figuring out how to look at all these other zones while you have an old zone versus a new zone come in, and some of that's still playing itself out. We wanted to keep it simple and just hit, at least out the gate, go for the redevelopment areas, because you did that last time. We tightened that up, made sure dispensaries and cultivation were properly handled, and this idea of training became one that for a few of the major redevelopment areas like Roebling, I think it's critical that you don't lose that opportunity. Leo brought up another site about the hospital. I think that's a site that you fold into this as well. So all these comments are great, and keep them coming, because I think all these comments are going to make for a much better ordinance at the end of the day.
Thank you, Chuck. And I would just echo that I think the intent here is that we want Trenton to do this right. That's why we had a public hearing with nothing on the agenda other than comments, and that's why we're talking about this here. And then I would expect if this goes to council, that there's another public hearing during a council meeting. And the idea here is that we want community feedback so that Trenton can be the model.
Yep, precisely.
Next on the agenda on the hand raised list is Juana Lowe.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have maybe a question and two concerns. I signed on a little bit late, so I'm not sure if this issue came up already or not. But are there stipulations regarding online sales by retailers? Whether that's going to be allowed and how that's going to be regulated and taxed? That's number one. Number two is, I think on page 6, they talk about cannabis training facilities. And they're saying that they may, but are not required to have a license to sell, cultivate, manufacture, etc. And that such operations are not subject to tax. So I'm wondering if somebody could comment on that, because it appears to me that this could potentially be a loophole where you could have a training facility actually selling. So that's a concern. And lastly, I just have a comment in terms of the location of sales, permitted locations allowed. I believe for class 5 and 6, A and B, and I'm not sure what A and B constitute, the type of businesses, but I hope that this is limited to commercial centers and not to local grocery stores or bodegas, where you could potentially have children walking into the stores to buy their candy, let's say, and be exposed to somebody selling the cannabis. So those are the 3 areas of concern that I have.
Thank you for raising all 3 of those. Mr. Bridges, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I can tell you that all of your concerns are very well vetted in the enabling statute. I mean, the operations cannot be in a bodega that's servicing young kids. It's very strict in that regard. The training facilities are simply that, training facilities. That really dovetails into what we were talking about earlier with respect to the educational component of it, and being able to train local students, local folks who are interested in learning about the cultivation, the manufacturing, the labeling, the testing of this. It's really the educational piece of it. But I do hear your concerns, and all of those issues are very well vetted and protected in the laws currently, and as the laws as they will be revised.
There is, if I may jump in, there is a provision in the legislation that was adopted by the legislature that there is no cannabis sales permitted in a place or on a property that does retail food. So no supermarkets, bodegas, things like that. You can't even be on the same property, and it's a weird piece of language that got dropped in there. But I could see on some level why they did it, but on other levels, it really rules out a lot of properties too. So.
Thank you. Any comments on online sales by retailers?
I think that's going to be a state issue, ma'am.
Okay.
I don't think the city is going to be able to regulate online sales. I would assume that Cannabis Regulatory Commission is going to be looking at those as they refine their rulemaking process. But I made a note of it to make sure I bounce off of them as they continue to vet those rules.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for the comments. Next on the list is Lefty Grimes. Mr. Grimes?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
There we go. You can hear me now.
Yes.
All right. I want to first thank you for these virtual meetings. It's very important I'm sorry, my name is Edward Lefty Grimes. I'm with sativacross.org. We're a 501c3 here in New Jersey advocating for cannabis patients' rights and disabled rights. And this meeting is very important for disabled people to take part because, you know, for 14 months, we gave able-bodied people things that disabled people have been asking for years, like online schooling, online work, online council meetings, online church. We got that for healthy people. And now a lot of towns are taking it away, and a lot of committees and councils are taking it away. And we appreciate this, that we can at least take part. My friend took part from his deathbed. So we've got a lot of sick people here that are able to take part. So I really appreciate that, advocating for the sick. I know you have no control over the tax, but you are going to take the medical cannabis tax, I believe. So I call this a wheelchair tax. I call it a cancer tax, a tax on multiple sclerosis. And I believe if you're going to give us this tax, at least give us representation for that taxation and fix the wheelchair access throughout Trenton, because the wheelchair access in Trenton is just as bad as what I've seen in Hudson County, which is terrible. You have a lot of one-step issues, a lot of 5 or 6 step issues. And that's something that really needs to be addressed to really give us representation. Like I said, for that taxation, you're taxing us in wheelchairs. Well, give us something for that. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for participating. Would Mr. Bridges like to respond? Or Anthony Santora? I know that there's been an effort to improve our ADA compliance, which is far from sufficient at this point. And would anyone like to respond?
Dan, give me 1 second. I'm on the other line with communications right now about a traffic signal issue. Hang on 1 second.
Okay, let's come back to that issue then.
With respect to ADA compliance, obviously any law that's passed in this state and in this city has to be ADA compliant. Any facility that is constructed needs to be ADA compliant, and any opportunities have to keep an eye in mind with. There has to be an inclusive effect in that regard. So, if you can give me maybe a specific example of what you're referring to, I'd be happy to try to address the square on, but any aspect of this ordinance or any laws that we have any involvement in have to be sensitized to the requirements of the Americans with Disability Act.
Well, I know in Hudson County, if you have an older building, these older buildings are grandfathered in, and that's the problem in Trenton. There's a lot of older buildings, and they're grandfathered in, so they don't need to put new access in when a new business comes in. I think that needs to be addressed as an ordinance where any new business has to have ADA compliance, because even these older buildings, you don't require them to fix their wheelchair access. They're grandfathered in.
I think that's something that we need to look at with respect to the historical buildings specifically. But I would be surprised and would look into it further to the extent that there was not a mechanism or way to require any entity coming into our borders to set up shop, not to make sure that they're compliant with ADA. That's paramount. I don't have any specific examples in other towns. I'd actually love to learn more about these buildings that are being grandfathered in that are not ADA compliant. To me, that runs in direct contravention of federal ADA laws as well as the state New Jersey law against discrimination. So. Yeah. If there are specific examples, please, shoot a comment over to me. Let me see it, because that would be problematic in my humble opinion.
Well, just look up Mrs. Fields in Bayonne. They just put in brand new Mrs. Fields in Bayonne with the stuff.
Okay, we'll do.
So there's one example. Just off the top of my head. Thank you.
Okay, tthanks, Lefty.
There's a lot of those the opportunities in the ordinance. You'll see one of the conditions is that they have to meet site plan and all the design standards of the zone that they're in. So that would automatically require them to bring the site up to ADA accessibility for new establishments, even rehab of old ones too.
I think when they're going through the rehab of the building, I think that's something that's outlined in ADA is outlined within their documents for inspection. So
yeah.
If there's a specific case, please let us know. But
corner of Market by the train station where we put in a wheelchair ramp, but it leads to nowhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of really bad examples.
Dan, I have a $750,000 contract going through City Council right now to upgrade what is old to bring it to current standards. So that's a constantly rotating thing that we do through our department. So we'll take care of that one when City Council approves and he starts his work.
Great. Next on the list to speak is Ron Zielinski.
Good evening, everyone. As the finance director for the city of Trenton, I would think that a portion of these fees that we're going to collect would need to go to offset the regulatory costs that we're going to have to incur to enforce the rules and standards that are provided. Just a comment.
Mr. Bridges, did the law department or anyone else in the city hall consider the need to offset regulatory costs?
To be very candid, no, we did not. Well, let me rephrase that. No, I did not. We can obviously try to forecast that, but to be very frank and respectful of everybody here, I did not look at that. But I'm sure that there will likely have to be some type of component with respect to. I just have not done the evaluation of that.
Okay, I think we'll come back to that at the end when we make recommendations, since we're not a taxation board, but we might recommend to city council what they might consider.
Yeah, I mean, this is something
Dan,
that
if I may,
obviously once we get past this specific aspect of it, it will have to go before the financial body, the taxing body, because we are touching on the tax code as well. So this is but the first step in the process. By no means are we saying this is going to be adopted as is in its entirety. We're going to have to get feedback from this body, from this public. We're going to have to get feedback from council, from Mr. Zielinski and his department. So there's a number of entities, individuals that are going to need to weigh in on this, and I think Mr. Zielinski kind of forecasts the next step with respect to this ordinance and other considerations that we're going to have to take into account.
Great.
And not to mention, some of the funding comes from the 30% and the 70% from impact zone and so forth, as it was written in the state statute. So a lot of that was part of the negotiations as well. The police department gets 30% of state tax revenue, and then 70% goes to impact zones. So that was already, some of that stuff, that concern was already earmarked for.
Thank you, Mr. Bridgewater. So I see two more hands on the list to speak. If we're going to take those two comments, and then if you have not spoken and you still wish to make a comment, please raise your hand now. Next on the list is Faye, and then we're going to go to Nate Melee. Faye, you're on. Stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Faye Coleman, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pure Genesis. I currently serve on the boards of the National Hemp Association, actually with Leo, and the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey, as well as the New Jersey Cannabis Association. We are a minority women business enterprise with over 250 years of business and industry experience. Our mission is simple: to educate, access, and provide advocacy. And our goal is to acquire a Class 5 dispensary license as an opportunity. Our focus, though, is to be a community-first business partner. And in doing that, offering 30% of our jobs for those being released due to small possession, providing transferable and leadership skills training, offering more than living wage and 1% profit sharing in the communities where we reside. We currently cultivate hemp in 3 states, including New Jersey, and we do education and business consulting. I do have my question, maybe a state-related question, but I believe the impact is at the local level. This hasn't been the first time that we are looking to acquire a license, but certainly my question is around many of the businesses who have received their licenses based on their community engagement and diversity plans. So to ensure we have businesses that meet those expectations per their applications, will Trenton look to have a scorecard of any kind regarding their community engagement and diversity efforts as it relates to their employees? And if so, for those who do not execute those plans, how will that be addressed?
There absolutely will be a scorecard or something in place of the sort. We obviously have not reduced that to a concrete document yet, but as you'll see embedded in the body of the ordinance, there is a strong push for diversity and inclusion. So in terms of how that will be determined, I would envision that it would be determined like any other MBE entity, where you would look for entities that are 51% or more minority owned, which includes different ethnicities as well as women-owned businesses. But that would be something that working committee, with the community's input and the community's suggestion, would put in place to make sure that there's transparency and fairness across the board with respect to this. However, at the end of the day, as we all know, this is ultimately going to be something that licenses that are coming down from the state. So while we will do our best to vet that at the introductory stage, to get an idea as to who we're talking to and what their plans are, and be able to vet them with respect to supporting these entities. Ultimately, these licenses are going to be coming from the state of New Jersey. So I think we really also need to keep an eye on that process, because quite frankly, I had some personal concern with respect to how those licenses are being issued, and in my opinion, the real lack of real diversity at that level. So I share in your concerns with that regards, but that's something that we're going to have to formulate once we have the working committee in plan, and really look to have a list of questions and a score sheet as to who this municipality is going to support making these applications.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I appreciate your comment.
The next on the list is Nate Melee.
Hi, yes, this is Nate Bailey. Thank you for taking my comment. I wanted to revisit a topic that was talked about a little bit earlier in the meeting today, and it's specifically around the distances from schools in Trenton as it relates to dispensaries. I had noted that it was 100 feet and non-adjacent from that school. I was curious, however, how those distances relate to other operations as far as in relation to the cannabis industry, specifically cultivation and manufacturing facilities. Is that the same distance applied for those licenses as well, or is it a different distance? And I was hoping you could maybe elaborate on that.
Mr. Bridges?
Yeah, those are different. If you noticed with respect to the classes and where they're located, the larger manufacturing and cultivation parts are limited right now to the commercial spaces. So there is no similar prohibition on those operations. And again, the thought was again taking into account what some of the comments that we received, not only from the public but from members of council, with respect to having a retail entity that's selling retail cannabis license directly across from the street. That's the real concern when it comes to the growing and manufacturing of these operations. It's not going to be an opportunity where they're going to be selling retail to passerbyers, or an opportunity for students to see the operations of a retail establishment. So that's why that restriction was in there specifically for the retail aspect of the licensing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Would anyone else from the public wish to speak or make a comment? Any other members of the board? I see Ms. McKethan, your hand is raised again. Maybe that was a mistake.
No, that was an accident. My apologies.
No worries. Just want to make sure that we give everyone who wishes to speak or ask a question a chance. I see Michael Colbert's hand. Michael, the floor is yours.
Yeah, just one quick question. I know several people said that they have more minor comments that they felt were just easier to email to Wes, grammar type stuff. I just wanted to find out who those comments should be sent to, and what is the deadline for getting those comments to us, to make sure that they can be incorporated properly.
Mike, I would like if they could just to maybe email, I don't know if we have a general email box for the planning board, or do we have something for general comments?
We don't. I'm happy to collect them though. My email is.
I think if you or someone can collect them, and we could have them, my preferably by the end of the week. You can feel free to copy me too, wbridges@trentonnj.org. I'm happy to take those, and I think for timing purposes, we should look to have those comments to us by the end of the week for incorporation.
Okay.
We're going to set a deadline of Friday, July 2nd, and those who wish to provide additional comments, edits, will submit those to Michael on behalf of the planning board, and then we'll consolidate and send over to the law department.
I'm putting my email address in the chat for anybody, and I will also read it out for anybody who doesn't have access to the chat. It is mkolber@trentonnj.org.
And mine again, I don't want to leave you hanging, Mike, by yourself. Mine again, just to reiterate, is wbridges, BRIDGES @trentonnj.org.
Other questions or comments?
Mr. Bridges, if this
Hi,
does
can
make it to, I'm sorry.
Let's
This
go,
will make
Anthony, and then we'll go back to Ms. McKiffen.
I'm sorry, just real quick, Dan. This will make the docket for the July meeting, being that they only meet once and we have to get the 2 readings through before the end of August.
Yes, it will.
Thank you.
It has to.
Ms.
Thank
McKiffen?
you.
Hi, I'm gonna introduce myself again because I didn't mention my organization is Shalana McKiffen, Garden State, previously Garden State Normal, now Cannabis Laws Matter. We're a 501c3 and C4, and we're a diverse organization, but we put focus on Black and Latinos and communities hit hardest by the war on marijuana. My family has had businesses in the city of Trenton for as long as 40 and 50 years. Grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, so on and so forth. So my advocacy in the city of Trenton is very important. I've been doing advocacy work since '93. Just it's been more private, helping people with my broker's license, get into real estate, get funding to get housing throughout the city of Trenton over the past years when I moved back. This topic is very important, and the slightest wrong decision with committees and not having transparency could just put Trenton in the wrong direction of having it grow from this resource. Cannabis can definitely have Trenton back on the map. As we've always been known, Trenton makes, the world takes. So I just ask that we keep transparency in this, and I appreciate your time in having this for us tonight.
Thank you for participating.
Hey, Dan.
Yes, Jeffrey.
Wes, I just got a text message from Wes. He lost power, so I don't believe he's on anymore.
Okay, well, I think we've just about wrapped up public comments, and I was going to make a motion that we continue to accept comments through Friday that will be submitted to Michael and the Planning Division, and that we subsequently send a letter to the Law Department and the City Council recapping this hearing, the number of comments, the general direction that folks, the questions that were raised, and general thrust of those comments, and that we do so in advance of any hearing that might be held by City Council.
This is Wanda. I second the motion.
Thank you, Wanda. George?
Yeah, Dan, are we going to get back together, because we do have an obligation to pass on the consistency with the master plan. So we, at some point in time, we have to make that determination if we're not making it tonight.
So I would take that as a friendly amendment to the motion, which would be to provide a recap to council and to the administration of the comments that we heard, the questions that were raised, and to also endorse the ordinance as being compliant with the Trenton 250 master plan, which seeks to foster entrepreneurship, provide opportunities for new businesses, and maybe we can cite some specific sections of the master plan, but I would amend the motion on the floor. Wanda, is that an acceptable amendment?
Yes, it's acceptable, and I second the amended motion.
Thank you. Are there further comments from the board?
Yeah, Dan?
Yes, Michael.
My concern is when council is meeting next and getting the resolution, a resolution to them at an appropriate time. I'm not sure that planning board is meeting again before this is actually going to go before council.
It wouldn't be a resolution, it would be a letter. Right, George?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a resolution prepared, but I won't subject everybody reading it. It's very simple. It just says that it's consistent with the master plan. I can send that over to you for your docu-signature, and then we'll have it tomorrow.
So we could have a cover letter that recaps the comments that we heard tonight, questions that we heard, saying that we believe this is compliant with the master plan, and then the resolution would be attached.
That's correct.
Any
Dan?
other comments? Yes.
Dan,
Mr.
comments
Bridges?
from the previous meeting too, right?
That's a good question. We already actually transmitted those via a letter a few weeks ago. I think what we should do is probably stick to this evening's comments.
Yeah, tonight is
And
ordinance.
the letter lets mention that we also had the meeting in May, and we've previously communicated about that. Other questions or concerns from the board? Can we have a roll call on the motion, please?
Yes. Dan Fatton,
Yes.
Jamie Carpenter,
Yeah.
Jeff Halpern,
Yes.
Joe Harrison,
Yes.
Patricia Nima Mohammed,
Yes.
Anthony Santora,
Yes.
Wanda Swiget,
Yes.
Charles Romano.
Yes.
Okay, that's unanimous. So thank you to everyone that participated in this meeting and provided comments or questions. We really appreciate you taking the time on this evening to discuss this issue facing the city. As a reminder, in the chat, Michael has included his email address. If you have additional comments that you'd like to submit, please do so by Friday, July 2nd. And George, you and I will work on the letter and resolution that will go to council from the planning board, hopefully by the end of the week.
Sure, absolutely.
Is there any other business? I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Councilman. All in favor? Aye.
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 Thanks, folks. Have a nice night.
Good night,
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.